The first time I noticed the empty seat, I was late. Not fashionably late, not strategically late, genuinely, catastrophically late, in the way that only happens when your alarm decides to betray you on a Monday morning, when your shoelace snaps clean in half at the front door, and when the city bus pulls away from the curb exactly as you round the corner, close enough that you could have touched the back panel if you'd lunged for it. I stood on that pavement, chest heaving, backpack half hanging off one shoulder, and watched it go. Then I ran the rest of the way to school. By the time I pushed through the heavy double doors of Callaway Secondary and made it to room 14 for first period literature, every single seat was taken. Every single seat except one. It was the seat directly beside Marvin Berg. Now, if you went to Callaway Secondary, you knew who Marvin Berg was. You knew in the same way you knew which hallways to avoid after dark, which vending machines swallowed your coins without apology, and which teachers would let things slide and which ones kept receipts. You just knew. It was environmental knowledge, absorbed through proximity and whispered warnings and the general collective understanding that some things in this world required no explanation. Marvin Berg was tall, not lanky tall, but structured tall, built like someone had taken the blueprint for a person and decided more was more. He had dark hair that fell across his forehead without any apparent awareness of it, sharp eyes that could strip the pretense off a situation in about 4 seconds, and an expression that defaulted to something that I can only describe as controlled disinterest in everything and everyone. He wore the same kind of dark, worn clothing most days, not because he couldn't afford otherwise. I had genuinely no idea about his financial situation, but because it seemed like a deliberate statement, an aesthetic philosophy. I am not here to perform for you. He sat at his desk like furniture sat at desks, motionlessly, occupying the space as if it had always been his, and the room had simply been built around him. The seat beside him had no one in it. "Thomas," said Mr. Alderton from the front, giving me the flat look reserved for latecomers. "Sit down, please." There was nowhere else to go. I walked down that aisle with the specific horror of someone walking towards something they cannot name and cannot avoid, slid into the seat beside Marvin Berg, dropped my bag at my feet, and did not look at him. Not once. I stared directly at the whiteboard as if it were broadcasting life-saving information. He didn't look at me either. The lesson proceeded. Mr. Alderton talked about imagery in the novel we were supposedly reading. I took notes with extreme focus. Marvin Berg did not take notes. He sat with one arm resting on the desk, the other hanging at his side, staring somewhere past the front of the room at something only he could see. About 20 minutes in, I accidentally dropped my pen. It rolled under his desk. The reasonable, logical thing to do was to ask, or to just reach down and get it. Both options existed. Both were simple and socially acceptable. Instead, I sat there frozen for a full minute, staring at my pen next to his shoe, calculating. Then, without a word, without looking at me, Marvin Berg hooked his foot around my pen, dragged it forward, and nudged it back under my side of the desks. I picked it up. "Thanks," I whispered, barely breath. He said nothing. He didn't look at me. He just shifted slightly in his seat and went back to staring at the middle distance. That was the first day. It wasn't until Thursday that I fully understood what was happening. I arrived on time that day, blessedly, normally on time, and walked into room 14 to find that the desk beside Marvin Berg was empty again. This seemed statistically improbable. At any given point during first period, that room had a seating arrangement that had calcified over weeks of habit. People sat in their same spots out of social inertia alone. The idea that the seat beside Marvin Berg would remain unclaimed required some explanation. The explanation, I realized with slow dawning clarity as I looked around the room, was that no one wanted to sit there. Literally no one. There were students milling near the back, talking in clusters, not yet settled. The desk beside Marvin was the last unclaimed territory. People were doing that polite urban avoidance thing where you shift your trajectory slightly so you don't have to address a thing directly. I sat down in it. Not because I was late this time, not because it was the only option. I just did. It was already my seat in some undefined way from Monday. My pen had touched the floor under it. Mr. Alderton had looked at me while I sat there and built the seating chart in his mental register with me in that position. Marvin Berg glanced sideways at me when I sat down. Just a glance. Maybe a second of it. Then he looked forward again. "Morning," I offered, because I was trying to be a functional human being. He said, which was not a word, but it also wasn't silence. I decided to count it. My name is Thomas Duffy. I am, by most accounts, an unremarkable person, not in the self deprecating way people say that to be reassured otherwise, but in the genuine statistical sense. I am medium height, medium build, possessed of a face that people describe as friendly when they're being kind, and forgettable when they are not. I like books. I make decent grades. I have a small but solid group of friends. Priya, who is sharp and funny, and always running on 4 hours of sleep, and Jonah, who is the most genuinely gentle person I have ever met, and who once cried at a wildlife documentary about migratory patterns. I did not have a reputation for anything in particular. I had not done anything remarkable or terrible. I floated through Callaway Secondary like a reasonable piece of furniture, present, functional, unremarked upon. I was not the kind of person who ended up with assigned adjacency to Marvin Berg. And yet, the following Monday, I walked into room 14 at the normal time, with my shoelaces intact, having caught the correct bus, and found Marvin Berg already in his seat. He was facing the front. His bag was on the desk. The seat beside him, my seat as I had started thinking of it, in the quiet interior of my own head, was empty. There were two other empty seats in the room, one near the window, one at the back near the door. Both were unclaimed and perfectly acceptable options. I could have sat in either of them. I walked to the seat beside Marvin Berg and sat down. He did not acknowledge me. His eyes did not move. His expression did not change. But his bag, I noticed, had been pulled to one side of his desk rather than centered on it. Slightly, just slightly, as if it had been placed deliberately so as not to encroach on the space next to him, the space where I would sit. I was probably imagining it. It was Priya who first named the thing I was only half aware of. We were at lunch, the three of us, Priya, Jonah, and me, at our usual table near the east window, where the light was good in autumn but would become murderous in summer. Priya had her chemistry notes out beside her food, and was eating a sandwich with one hand and highlighting with the other in the manner of someone who had decided time was a resource not to be squandered. "I heard you've been sitting next to Marvin Berg," she said, not looking up from her notes. "First period literature," I confirmed. "That's either brave or oblivious." Jonah looked up from his food with the expression of someone who finds everything mildly interesting on principle. "What's he like up close?" I thought about this. "Quiet. He doesn't talk much." He nudged my pen back to me once. Priya put her highlighter down. This apparently was worth her full attention. "He nudged your pen back?" It fell under his desk. "Marvin Berg," she repeated, like she was reading from a document. "The Marvin Berg, the one who apparently broke up a fight in the East Corridor last year by just standing near it. I don't know if that story is accurate. The one who made a substitute teacher have a breakdown just by maintaining eye contact. That might also be embellished. Thomas," she picked her highlighter back up. "He doesn't touch people's things. He doesn't interact with people unless it's necessary, and necessary by his standards seems to mean imminent physical danger." She uncapped the highlighter with her teeth and marked something. "He nudged your pen." "It was small," I said. "It's massive," she replied. Jonah was nodding slowly, with the solemn energy of a person who had seen many films about these exact situations and knew where they ended up. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said. Neither of them said anything. The sound of the cafeteria filled the space around us. Priya highlighted something. Jonah ate his food. I looked at my lunch and thought, in the very back of my mind where things were still forming and not yet fully visible, about a bag nudged to one side and a seat left empty. Here's the thing about patterns. They require at least 3 data points to be called patterns, and before that point, they are technically just coincidences. I was very committed to this reasoning. I applied it with scientific diligence. Data point 1. The Monday I was late, and the only empty seat was his. Data point 2. The Thursday I arrived on time, and the seat was still unclaimed. Data point 3. The following Monday, same result. By data point 4, the Wednesday where I came in slightly ahead of the bell, to find that 3 seats were open, and the one beside Marvin Berg was among them, and I sat there by now without thinking, and he adjusted his position very slightly, in a way that seemed like acknowledgement. I had a pattern. I just didn't know what to do with it. The pattern continued into the second week, and the third. Every morning I came into room 14. Every morning the desk beside Marvin Berg was empty, even on the days when other seats were taken early. I began to notice the architecture of it. Other students would come in, look at the available seats, look at that seat, look elsewhere. It wasn't sinister. It was just the gravitational logic of Marvin Berg. He had a field around him, an invisible radius, and people respected it without being asked. Because apparently my radius sensing equipment was faulty, or because by the time I registered the field I was already inside it. Or because, and this was the thought I kept almost having and then deflecting before it fully arrived, I didn't want to sit anywhere else. You're doing it again, Priya said one Thursday as we walked toward the building from the bus stop. Doing what? That thing where you're thinking about something, but you're making your face very deliberately neutral about it. I don't do that. You absolutely do that. It's like watching someone try to not look at a door. She shouldered her bag. Is it the Berg situation? There isn't a situation. There is absolutely a situation. Jonah and I have been monitoring it from a distance. You've been, why are you monitoring it? She gave me a look that suggested I was being slow. Because you're our friend, and something is happening to you, and you keep very carefully not talking about it. I stopped walking. We were at the side entrance, the one with the slightly warped door that always required a shoulder to open. The morning was cold enough that our breath was visible. Around us, other students flowed past with the indifferent momentum of people going somewhere they hadn't chosen. I don't know what it is, I admitted. Tell me what you do know. I thought about it, about walking into that room every morning, about the empty seat, about the way Marvin Berg never acknowledged me with words, but always seemed to register me, in small physical adjustments and a stillness that felt different from his stillness with everyone else. About the nudged pen, about the bag pushed to the side, about the fact that when I sat down, the particular quality of silence around him shifted, just slightly, to something that felt less like a wall and more like a held breath. I don't know, I said again, but I notice things. What things? Small things, I said. Things that might mean nothing. Priya was quiet for a moment, then, they usually mean something. She pushed the warped door open, and we went in. The first time Marvin Berg spoke more than a syllable to me was in the fourth week, on a morning when Mr. Alderton had stepped out briefly and left us with a passage to annotate on our own. The room had that specific atmosphere of supervised absence. Everyone slightly louder than usual, the work happening at a leisurely pace, people stretching and turning and talking to neighbors in the way they didn't when the teacher was present. I was genuinely working, because I am, if nothing else, a conscientious student. Beside me, Marvin Berg had his book open, but was not writing anything. He was reading. Not the annotating that we were meant to be doing, but actually reading, ahead, I thought, from the pace of page turns. His pen was capped and sitting beside the book. After a few minutes, without looking at me, he said, "You're marking everything." I looked down at my passage. It was, in fairness, heavily annotated. I liked annotating. That's kind of the assignment. Marking everything is the same as marking nothing. I looked at him. He was still reading, not looking at me, which gave me the unusual ability to study his face for a moment without social consequence. There was a small line between his brows, not a frown exactly, more like concentration, the kind of face someone makes when the interior landscape is very busy. That's an interesting view for someone who hasn't written anything, I said. A pause. Something shifted in his expression. It was not exactly amusement, it was something adjacent to it, a brief movement at the corner of his mouth that appeared and then was controlled back into stillness. I remember it instead, he said. What, the whole passage? Most of it. I looked at him with what I suspected was visible skepticism. He finally turned his eyes toward me. A sideways thing, brief and level. His eyes were darker than I had expected at that distance, with a quality of attention that made me feel slightly like a problem being assessed. The line about the window, he said. Second paragraph. It's doing three things at once, and Alderton's only going to talk about one of them. I looked at the passage. Second paragraph. The line about the window. I read it again with that framing. He was right. It was doing three things at once. What are the other two? I asked. He told me. It took maybe 45 seconds and involved no performance, no reaching for language. He said it directly and clearly, the way someone speaks when they've already done all the thinking and have arrived at the conclusion and are just reporting back. I listened and I understood and I wrote it in the margin in my own shorthand. When he finished, he went back to reading. Thank you, I said. But this time, I thought, the was different. Warmer somehow. Or maybe I was inventing warmth where there was just air. I annotated the rest of the passage with considerably more selectivity. After that, things shifted in the small, barely visible way that things shift when a door opens a crack. Not wide, not swinging open, light flooding in wide, just a crack, enough to let in a different quality of air. He would say things sometimes, rarely, never social things, never the checking in conversation filler that most people use to paper over silence. When he spoke, it was always about something specific, the novel we were reading, a point Alderton had made that he disagreed with, a question posed in a way that seemed rhetorical but wasn't. Once, he pointed out that I was holding my pen wrong, and that was why my wrist hurt at the end of class. I had not mentioned that my wrist hurt. I did not know how he knew. I adjusted my grip. My wrist stopped hurting by the following week. In return, I did not try to fill the silence he left. This felt important somehow. That whatever was being built between us did not require constant verbal maintenance. Other people treated Marvin Berg's silence like a problem to be solved. They would nervous talk at him, perform casualness, try to find the key. I had noticed this from other classrooms, other situations, people working very hard to get something from him that he wasn't offering. I wasn't working hard. I was just sitting there in my seat, doing my work, and occasionally talking when I had something to say. Maybe that was the difference. Maybe that was nothing. I still wasn't certain. The first time I saw Marvin Berg outside of first period literature, it caught me sideways. It was the library. After school, mid-October, the light going gold and amber through the high windows the way it does at that time of year, landing on the shelves in long rectangles. I was there for a reference book that the online catalog claimed the library had, but that I had not successfully located on 3 previous attempts, and I was trying a different section this time with diminishing optimism. I rounded a shelving unit and nearly walked directly into him. He was standing at the end of an aisle with a book open in his hands, reading. Not browsing, reading with the focused, removed attention of someone who had left the building mentally and gone somewhere else entirely. He was wearing a dark jacket, and his bag was on the floor at his feet, and in the amber light of the late afternoon, he looked, I noticed this with an uncomfortable clarity, quite striking. He looked up. There was a moment of adjustment on both our parts, I think. Outside room 14, we had no established framework. The desk, the routine, the small rituals of our proximity, none of that was here. We were just 2 people in a library aisle, blinking at each other. Hi, I said, because I defaulted to social lubricant in uncertain situations. You're in the wrong section, he said. I blinked. What? The reference you're looking for. I've seen you here 3 times looking for it. It's in the 820s, not the 810s. Someone shelved it wrong. I stared at him. How did you know what I was looking for? He closed his book partway, keeping a thumb in the page. You came in with your phone open to the catalog entry. I could see the cover thumbnail from where I was sitting. I had not noticed him sitting. I tried to reconstruct my arrival and could not remember where my attention had been. Apparently not on the reading area. You've been here all 3 times, I said. I come here after school on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This was, I realized, more biographical information than he had volunteered in all of our weeks of first period adjacency. A schedule. Actual consistent schedule information. I wasn't sure what to do with it. Thank you, I said, for the section number. He nodded and went back to his book. I found my reference in the 820s, right where he said. On the way out, I passed the reading area and glanced over. He was still there, in the same chair, the same focused absence from the room. He did not look up. But when I passed, he turned 1 page. It was the only movement he made. And I noticed, and this is the kind of noticing that I was beginning to understand was the main activity of my inner life when it came to Marvin Berg, that he had been on that same page all 3 of the times I had come looking. I told Priya about it the next morning on the bus. She listened with the focused attention she usually reserved for exam revision, which was both flattering and slightly alarming. He knew your catalog entry from across the room, she said. He said he could see the thumbnail. And he's been in the same chair all 3 times you went. Apparently, Thomas, I know. He's been watching you. I think he just reads there and happened to notice. He cataloged your research process, she said flatly. From a distance over multiple visits, and then waited until you were right in front of him and told you where the book was. When you say it like that, I'm saying it like that because that's what happened. I looked out the bus window at the gray morning street. He could just be observant. He is observant about you specifically. That's different from generally observant. She wasn't wrong. I had noticed over our weeks of first period adjacency that Marvin Berg seemed to have a very thorough awareness of things at a distance. He would mention something that had happened on the other side of the room without appearing to have looked at it. He noticed when Alderton was in a bad mood from 10 feet away before the teacher had said anything. He was fundamentally a person who paid attention to things. The question was whether that attention, when it was directed at me, meant anything beyond his general operating system. I thought about the empty seat, the bag pushed to one side. The pen, the page he had been on 3 times. I don't want to assume, I said. Priya's expression was patient in the particular way it was patient when she thought I was being dense. I know you don't, but assumptions aren't the same as observations. You've observed quite a lot. What if I'm wrong? What if you're right? The bus pulled up to the stop and we gathered our bags and joined the moving current of other students. And I did not answer because I did not have an answer. I had a seat beside a quiet, difficult-to-read person, and a collection of small, inconclusive data points, and a feeling in my chest that had been building very quietly for about a month, the way water builds behind a dam. Present, pressured. November arrived with cold that had teeth in it, the kind that went through your jacket if it wasn't the right jacket, and found all the places where warmth lived and methodically removed them. The school heating ran inconsistently, so first period was often cold in a way that made concentration require actual effort. This is relevant because of the scarf incident. I had by November developed the habit of leaving my jacket on during first period, on the days when the heating was sulking. This was normal. Lots of people did this. On the particular Wednesday I'm about to describe, I had additionally worn a scarf, the knitted kind that had been a gift from my grandmother, and that I had not yet lost, through the mysterious mechanism by which I lost most of my accessories. I arrived. I sat down. I unwound the scarf from my neck and folded it over my bag. The room was cold, but not unreasonably so. The lesson started. We were now into a new unit, poetry this time, and Alderton was doing one of his better performances, the kind where his voice went into the rhythms of the verse, and you could see why he had probably once wanted to do something other than teach. About halfway through, Marvin Berg, without preamble, said very quietly, "You should keep that on." I turned to look at him. He was looking at the front. "The scarf," he said, with the tone of someone clarifying. "I'm not cold," I whispered. "You've had your shoulders up around your ears for the last 20 minutes. I became suddenly and keenly aware of my own posture. My shoulders were in fact slightly raised. I hadn't noticed. I picked the scarf up off my bag and put it back on. He said nothing else. He returned to the poem on his desk, but there was something in the 2 seconds after I put the scarf back on, a very subtle easing, a settling in his posture, that I felt rather than saw, the way you feel a change in air pressure rather than see it. After class, as people gathered their things, Jonah appeared at the door. He'd had a free period and come to meet me for lunch. I watched him clock Marvin Berg with the careful blankness of someone actively managing their expression. We walked out and into the hall, and Jonah fell into step beside me. "He's taller than I thought," Jonah said. "You've seen him before." "Not that close." He was quiet for a moment. "He told you to put your scarf back on?" "You heard that?" "I was at the door, Thomas. He told you to put your scarf back on." Jonah said this with the same weight Priya had given the pen incident. That's very observant," I said. "He's observant." Jonah gave me a look of such gentle skepticism that I felt briefly embarrassed by my own deflection. "He's observant about you," Jonah said, echoing Priya with an exactness that suggested they had been discussing this. Specifically, consistently. "That's not just observation. That's Jonah. Caring," he finished. "That's caring about someone." The word hit me somewhere in the chest and sat there, warm and slightly destabilizing, and I didn't say anything else for the rest of the walk to the cafeteria. Caring. The thing about that word was that once it was said, it reorganized everything around it. It was like being given a key and finding out it fit a lock you'd been staring at for months, without knowing it was a lock. The empty seat, every morning, no matter who came in first. Caring. The bag nudged to one side to leave room. Caring. The pen, the literary analysis, the wrist grip, the library section number, the scarf, the page he had been on 3 times. Caring. I sat with this for several days. It was not a comfortable sitting. It had the quality of something important and unresolved, the kind of thing that surfaces at 3 in the morning when your brain has stopped managing its own curation and just shows you everything. I would be doing something completely routine, eating breakfast, walking to the bus, flipping through revision notes, and the word would arrive and settle, and I would have to do something with it. What I did with it mostly was nothing, because the other side of the word was the question of whether it was true, and whether it meant what I thought it meant, and whether my interpretation of small gestures and adjustments and held pages in library books was accurate or wishful or both. Wishful. That was the operative word, because by this point I had to be honest with myself about the fact that I wanted it to be true, that when I sat down beside Marvin Berg every morning and the quality of silence around him changed, I wasn't just noting it as a neutral observer. I was noting it with the particular attention of someone who had developed an investment. I liked him. I had, at some undateable point in the last 2 months, developed feelings for a person who communicated primarily through inference and who most people at Callaway Secondary treated as a kind of ambient, natural hazard. This seemed like information I should probably do something with. Mr. Alderton announced the paired assignment on a Friday in mid-November with the specific energy of someone who had been waiting to reveal this for a while, and found the moment mildly entertaining. "I've already arranged the pairs," he said, which produced the predictable low murmur of a class deprived of its right to self-select. "These are based on my observation of your analytical strengths. I want complementary perspectives, not matching ones." He read the list. When he got to my name, followed by Marvin Berg's, I felt the blood leave my face and then return very quickly, which produced a brief but genuine lightheadedness. Beside me, Marvin Berg showed no visible reaction, which was entirely consistent with him. "You have 2 weeks," Alderton was saying. "Choose a theme across the 3 texts we've covered this term and develop an argument. I expect it to be the kind of analysis that surprises me." The class began to reconfigure as people turned to their partners. I turned to look at Marvin Berg. He was already looking at me, not in the sideways glance way, but directly, which was unusual enough that it took me a moment to recalibrate. "Okay," I said, because something needed to be said. "Okay," he said. This was technically the complete exchange, but there was a weight to his okay that the word didn't usually carry, something attentive and deliberate, like he had prepared for this specific outcome. Or maybe I was projecting. I was very much in the phase of not fully trusting my own readings. "We'll need to meet outside of class," I said, "to work on it." "I know. Library, maybe? You're there Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays." A pause. Something shifted briefly in his expression. Not the corner of mouth movement from before, but something in his eyes, quick and then gone. "After school works. Monday, then." "Monday." He turned back to the front. I turned to the front. The class noise continued around us, and I stared at my desk with the very focused internal activity of someone who has just had a small but significant earthquake and is waiting for the aftershock assessment. Priya found me in the hall afterward. "You got paired with him," she said. "Did you see Alderton's face when he read the list? He definitely did that on purpose. He's a literature teacher. He's been watching the two of you for weeks." She pressed her lips together in a way that contained a great deal of commentary she had chosen not to vocalize. "When are you meeting?" "Monday, library." "Monday," she repeated. "Don't say it like that." She was absolutely saying it like something. "I'm just noting that you have been adjacent to this person for 2 months, and now you have a reason to be adjacent to him, outside of class and in a more extended way. It's a school project. It is also, possibly, the best thing that has ever happened to you." I walked away with some dignity and tact. Not much, but some. The library after school on Monday had a different quality to it than the library during the day. Quieter, obviously. The daytime noise and motion was gone, replaced by the particular stillness of a large room with books in it and winter coming through the windows. The amber light was there again, the way it always was in that room late in the day. It smelled like old paper and the specific institutional cleanliness of places that were maintained rather than loved. Marvin Berg was already there when I arrived. He was at a table, not the reading chair where I usually found him, but a study table with actual workspace. 2 chairs pulled to it, a lamp on. His bag was on the table. The lamp was on. Both chairs were arranged with their backs to the shelves. I sat down across from him. We looked at each other for a moment with the slightly different register of 2 people who had spent 2 months alongside each other, but not actually facing each other, and were now doing the facing thing and adjusting. "What do you want to argue?" he said, which was how he opened a conversation, directly at the center of the thing, without preamble. "Something about memory," I said. "I had been thinking about this since Friday. All 3 texts have characters who are navigating something they can't fully access, either in themselves or in the other person. There's a theme of partial knowledge and what you do with it." He was quiet for a moment, which I had learned to distinguish from disagreement. It was thinking quiet, not no quiet. "Unreliable access to interior states," he said. "Not just memory, perception of other people. Right, you can't fully know what's going on inside someone else, so you construct them from partial information. And sometimes the construction is wrong," he said. "And sometimes it's more accurate than the person expected." Another quiet. His eyes on me, steady, with that quality of assessment that I was used to, but that felt different right now, at a table, in lamplight, without a classroom around us. "Start with the first text," he said, "the specific lines you want to build from." So we worked. I had not expected working with Marvin Berg to be what it was, which was excellent. He was fast and precise, and genuinely uninterested in taking the easy interpretation. Every time I offered something, he would push on it, not dismissively, but with the focused pressure of someone who wanted the argument to be as sound as it could possibly be. He knew the text better than I did in terms of retention, could cite specific passages without looking them up, and had developed interpretations that I hadn't encountered in any of the secondary reading I'd done. He was also, and this surprised me less than it might have, if I thought about it, good at building on what I said rather than replacing it. When I offered a reading, he didn't discard it. He would hold it for a moment, find the strongest part of it, and push further. It felt like a conversation rather than a competition, which was not what I had expected from a person who interacted with most people as if they were mild inconveniences. At some point, I had lost track of time, which happens when something is genuinely engaging. I looked up to make a point and found him already looking at me in a way that went still when our eyes met, not in an uncomfortable way, in the way something goes still when it has been caught in motion and hasn't yet decided what to do. The argument works, I said, because the work was what was on the table. It does, he agreed. His voice had a slightly different quality than it did in class, quieter, with less of the control, as if the room allowed for less performance. We should probably outline the sections. Probably. Neither of us moved to do this immediately. The light through the windows had gone deeper gold, moving into the orange end of the spectrum. The library was very quiet. I could hear the faint sound of the buildings settling around us, and the very distant sound of traffic and my own breathing. "You're not like most people," Marvin Berg said. It was so removed from what we had been doing that I took a moment to catch up. "What?" He was looking at his notes now. "In that class, you don't try to get something from me." He paused. "Most people are trying to get something, to get me to respond a certain way, or to prove something, or to see what happens. You just sit there." I considered this. "I'm just sitting there," I confirmed. "I know." He looked up again. "That's what I said. Is that bad?" Something very brief crossed his face. "No," he said. "It's not bad." I held that. There was the feeling again, the water behind the dam. "I should annotate my copy," I said after a moment that was approximately 1 second too long to be nothing. He said, and we went back to work. We met 3 times for the project, Monday, Wednesday, Friday of that week, the same schedule he used for his reading, slotted with the smooth efficiency of someone who had been planning the arrangement. I noticed this. I noticed it in the way I noticed everything now, with the specific attention of a person who is cataloging without meaning to, building a case without intending to, arriving at a conclusion that had been approaching for months. The second meeting, he brought 2 cups of coffee from the machine at the end of the corridor. One he put in front of me without asking. I drank it because I was cold and it was there. The third meeting, he had marked a section of the primary text with a small sticky note in my copy. I had left it on the table at the end of our Monday session. He had picked it up, and in the margin of the section we discussed, there was a note in his handwriting. "Look at this alongside the first chapter. Same image, different function." He had done my homework for me, basically, or added to it, without being asked. "You marked my copy," I said. "I had a thought about the comparison. While you were at home?" He looked up from his own notes. "Yes, you were thinking about the project at home. I was thinking about the argument." A pause. "I often work through problems when I'm not here." "Right," I said. "Right." My handwriting as I took notes over the next 20 minutes was slightly less neat than usual. We submitted the project on the Friday before the Thanksgiving break. Alderton received it with a particular expression, measured interested, and said he would have it back to us the following week. The break was 4 days. I spent most of it at home, which was ordinarily comfortable, and felt mildly restless in a way I did not entirely understand. I sat at the kitchen table, doing revision that didn't need doing yet. I went for walks that were slightly longer than necessary. I called Priya, who was at her cousin's place and sounded happy and distracted, and gave me 5 minutes before someone pulled her away. On the third day, I was actually reading, the novel we had just analyzed, rereading sections now that the project was done, and the academic overlay was removed. Reading it for the story, rather than the argument. I was at the section about the window, the one Marvin had named on the first day, the 3 things it was doing at once. I put the book down, I picked up my phone, I had his number from the project coordination. We had exchanged them for logistical purposes, and had used them exactly that way, brief confirmatory messages about meeting times, and one exchange about a specific citation format. Nothing personal, nothing that reached past the project. I typed, "Been rereading the primary text. You were right about the window. It's doing a 4th thing too." I sent it before I could think too carefully about whether to. The reply came 20 minutes later. What for thing? And we talked. We texted back and forth for an hour and a half about the text and then about other texts and then about reading in general. And at no point did either of us reference the project as the reason we were talking, because the project was done and submitted, and the conversation continued anyway, past the point where it had anything to justify it except the simple fact of itself. When I finally put the phone down, it was late and the house was quiet, and I was sitting in the dark kitchen with the specific feeling of someone who has been moving towards something for a long time and has just realized they are very close. The project came back with the highest mark either of us had received individually in that class. Alderton wrote 2 paragraphs of feedback and circled 3 arguments as genuinely sophisticated. In class, he made a brief comment about the interpretation of the window passage, the 4th function, and looked at neither of us specifically, which was the teacher equivalent of looking at both of us specifically. Walking out after class for the first time, Marvin Berg and I walked in the same direction because we had both realized we were going to the same corridor for second period. It was the first time we had walked together outside room 14. He was taller beside me than I had registered when we were sitting. Another recalibration, another adjustment of the spatial register. We walked without talking for about 30 seconds. Good mark, I said, because I was incapable of nothing. Yes, he said. 20 more seconds. Do you want to? I started and then reconsidered. What? He said. Nothing. I was going to say something about rereading the second text, but it wasn't interesting enough to say out loud. A pause. Then quietly, you can say things that aren't interesting. I looked at him. He was looking forward, not at me. The control was there, but the edge of his mouth had that movement. Generous of you, I said. We arrived at the corridor junction, where our paths separated. We both stopped, and there was a moment of facing each other in a hallway that had no precedent in our arrangement, which was seated, desk adjacent, not standing and out in the open. Same time Monday, he said. Library, after school, stating it, not asking. The project was done. There was no project reason for the library. We don't have the project anymore, I said. I know, he said. The second of eye contact that followed was the most significant second I had experienced in recent memory. Monday, I said. He turned and walked away toward his class, and I turned and walked toward mine, and I was absolutely aware of the shape of the last 30 seconds in the way you are aware of something that has officially announced itself. Priya found me at lunch and sat down and said, immediately, something happened. Something definitely happened. You have a look. I don't have a look. You have the look that precedes something happening, she said. The before look. She opened her lunch. Tell me. I told her about the hallway, about the Monday library, about the project justification being gone and the Monday library existing anyway. She was quiet for a moment. He's asking to see you, she said, outside of any assigned reason. He's suggesting we both be in the same place we're usually both in. Thomas. Her voice was fond in that particular way that meant she found me both dear and exasperating. He has been saving you that seat for 2 months. He has been tracking where you are and what you need and providing it before you ask. He has been doing all of this without acknowledging it because he is, and I say this with no malice, a person who cannot apparently say a direct thing to save his life. She paused. He is asking you to the library, with no project reason. Please understand what that is. It might just be habit, I said. It is not habit, she said. Jonah, who had been quietly eating until this point, said, what would it take for you to believe it's not just habit? I thought about this honestly. I don't know, I admitted. I keep thinking I know, and then I second-guess the interpretation. What does your instinct say? Jonah asked. I looked at my food, at the table, at the ordinary busy noise of the cafeteria around us, and the gray November light through the windows. My instinct, I said slowly, says that he knows I'm in the room before I get to my seat, that he's thought about me when I wasn't there, that the seat is always empty because he doesn't want anyone else in it. Silence. That's not a small thing to believe, I said. No, Priya said gently, it isn't, but I think you already believe it. The library, after school, the amber light, the settled quiet, the table with the lamp already on because he arrived first. Always arrived first. I sat down across from him and we looked at each other. No project, I said. No project, he agreed. So what are we doing? He was quiet for a moment, in the particular way, the thinking quiet, not the no quiet. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a book I didn't recognize. He put it on the table between us. I've been reading this, he said. I thought you'd want to as well. I looked at the book. I looked at him. You brought me a book recommendation, I said. I brought you a book. Carefully, if you want it. Why? A pause. In the lamplight, his face was doing something I had not seen it do before. Not the control, not the assessment, but something less managed. Something that was slightly vulnerable, in the way a thing is vulnerable when it has run out of cover. Because I thought about you reading it, he said. And then thought about telling you I thought about you reading it. And then, he stopped. And then, I said. He looked at the book on the table. You make it easier. What easier? All of it. He said it without looking at me, which was unusual. Being in a room, talking, existing in proximity to another person without it requiring effort I don't have. I held this very carefully, like something that might break. Marvin, I said. He looked up, direct. Both of us at the table in the lamplight. I notice things about you, he said. I have been noticing things about you since the first day you sat down and didn't try to make me be something different. I notice what you need before you ask, and I do what I can to provide it without. I couldn't figure out how to say it directly. I don't do direct well. A beat. I'm doing direct now and I can tell it's going badly. It's not going badly, I said. My voice was quieter than I expected. I saved your seat, he said. Every morning, I know you noticed. I noticed. I didn't know how to say it was for you. You didn't have to say it, I said. The seat said it. He was looking at me with the most unguarded expression I had ever seen on his face, which was still controlled by most standards, but which, by his standards, was essentially the equivalent of everyone else's open book. The slight forward lean. The stillness that was not distance, but presence. I don't know how this works, he said. Social. The way people do this. I have watched people do this and I don't understand the steps. There aren't specific steps, I said. There seem to be from the outside. The steps are made up. People are just improvising and hoping the other person is improvising in a compatible direction. Something shifted in his face. Something that was a smile, almost, in the version of almost that was entirely his. Are you improvising in a compatible direction, I said. Yes, extremely. The moment stretched out. It had a texture to it. Warm, slightly suspended. The kind of moment that exists in the space between things being one way and becoming another. I don't want to do the project anymore, I said. I mean, I don't want to need the project as the reason to be here. I know, he said. That's why I brought the book. The book is a reason. The book is a better reason. I picked up the book and looked at it. Then I looked at him. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a scene from a film. It was two people at a library table in the late afternoon, with a lamp between them and a book on the table, and a cumulative weight of 2 months of small, careful gestures that had been the whole time saying something that neither of us had quite known how to say out loud. But we had said it now, in our way, imprecisely and exactly right. The seat remained mine. The morning ritual of room 14 continued, but with a different quality. Not the question of whether it meant something, but the settled knowledge of what it meant, worn quietly between us, like a thing we didn't need to announce. I started going to the library on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, not always to study, sometimes to read things he handed me, sometimes to read things I had brought that I thought he'd want to see. We built a shared bibliography of texts we had pushed at each other over the weeks, and sometimes the conversation went very far from the text and into territory that was more personal, more interior, and he navigated this with the deliberate care of someone learning a new language, slowly, with effort, and with a quality of attention that made it clear he was taking it seriously. He was not easy to know. I want to be honest about that. There were days when the wall came back up, not against me specifically, I came to understand, but against the general weight of existing in the world at a volume that other people found normal and he found loud. On those days he would be quieter than usual, and his posture would have a different quality, and I learned to match his register on those days, to let the silence do more work, to be present without asking anything of him. And I found, on the days when I was the one who was overwhelmed, by coursework or social friction or the particular grinding exhaustion of trying to be functional all the time, that he would do the same thing in return, not in the gregarious way, not with encouragement or performance, just present, just there, occasionally without looking up from whatever he was reading, providing a small offering, a coffee, a sticky note, a pointed-out misprint, once a very precisely calibrated observation about my grip on a pen. In December, at the school's winter event, one of those obligatory gatherings where people stood in a gymnasium with punch and the pretense of festivity, I was looking for an exit strategy when I felt him appear beside me, not touching, just beside me, shoulder to shoulder in the slightly too crowded room. You want to leave, he said. The music is very loud. He turned slightly so that his shoulder was a more definite presence. We can stand here for 10 more minutes and then leave. There's a passage by the east door that's mostly empty. You've mapped the building, I said. I've mapped all buildings I spend time in. That's extremely you, the corner of his mouth. I know. We stood there in the crowded gymnasium for 10 minutes, shoulder to shoulder, and nobody bothered us because nobody bothered Marvin Berg. And then we left through the passage by the east door, and we walked through the cold, clear night, and we talked for 2 hours and went home. The first time he took my hand, we were in the library. It was January. The new year arrived and the school resuming its rhythm, and we were at our table with our respective books and the lamp on. I had said something. I genuinely cannot reconstruct what it was, something about one of the texts, and he had made the argument that extended mine, the way he always did, finding the strongest thread and pulling further. And then, without preamble, without anything leading to it specifically, he put his hand over mine, where it was resting on the table. Just that. Just his hand on mine. Still present. I looked at our hands. I looked at him. He was looking at the page, not at me, with the particular managed expression that meant the interior was busy. I turned my hand over so our palms were together. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We read. The library was quiet. Outside, January had its teeth in everything. Inside, the lamp made a small warm circle on the table, and two people sat inside it with their hands together and their books open, and it was, I thought, exactly the shape of the thing we had been building. People at Callaway Secondary had various theories about Marvin Berg and why, at some point between October and January, he had become a person who walked with Thomas Duffy to second period and sat beside him at lunch sometimes, and was observed on more than one occasion in the library after school being entirely less terrifying than his reputation suggested. Most of these theories were wrong or partially right in ways that missed the most important parts. The most important parts were the small ones. They were always the small ones. They were the seat every morning, empty and waiting, arranged just slightly to one side, the pen nudged back, the book on the table, the hand offered without a word, the shape of caring between two people who had, by different routes, arrived at the same conclusion, that the most significant things are often the ones done without announcement, the gestures that don't insist on themselves, the presence that doesn't demand recognition, and simply continues, steady, in the manner of something true. Marvin Berg was the scariest boy in school, and he saved my seat every morning, and he pretended he wasn't. And I sat in it, every morning, knowing full well that he was, and that was how it started. And that, without requiring any particular end, was how it continued. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of this story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.